Hey guys, Spud here, and because I'm a bit late to the C-130J Super Herc release party, I asked all of you guys out there in the community what kind of content you'd like to see for the Herc right off the bat, and what would help you guys out the most. And the vast majority of you guys came back with a basic navigation and autopilot tutorial. And I figured that would be a great idea, because while the avionics and navigation systems and autopilot systems of the C-130 here are very similar to the airliners that say I fly at work every day, or that you guys can find in Microsoft Flight Simulator, there are some marked differences that can definitely be a bit confusing. So let's jump in the cockpit here and get started. Okay guys, now that we're in the cockpit of our C-130J, let's first go over the various keybinds and cockpit control panels we're going to need to use in order to interact with the flight director and thus the autopilot system. So hitting the escape key and going to the adjust controls panel, in no particular order here, we're going to need to have our yoke autopilot disconnect button, our pitch sync button, our AFCS pitch down, AFCS pitch up, AFCS lateral knob left, and AFCS lateral knob right, as well as our pilot heading knob counterclockwise and clockwise, along with the pilot course knob clockwise and counterclockwise as well. Now, you're also going to find duplicate keybinds here for the right seat that will be labeled co-pilot course knob counterclockwise and clockwise, and so on and so forth. However, this tutorial is agnostic as to whether or not you're the aircraft commander or you're sitting in the right-hand seat. It doesn't matter. It's the same on both seats, just things are switched up left and right a little bit. Okay, moving back to the cockpit here. Underneath the glare shield, we have our usual flight director control panel that is located right in front of you here. In the C-130, this is called the Ref Mode panel, and this is how we interact with and choose different modes for our flight director. It's important to note here, guys, that in large transport category type aircraft like airliners, C-130s, C-5s, things like that, we have our flight director, and we can place that in different modes, and then once we turn the autopilot on, the autopilot is going to follow the flight director. And even when you're hand flying, I recommend you set up the flight director into the appropriate modes, so that way you can also follow the flight director when you're hand flying your C-130. This is very different from the fighter jets that you're probably used to flying here in DCS. The next panel that we need is down here on the center pedestal, and these are duplicated left and right for the left and right hand seats. We have the CNI right here, which is the box where we input all of our variables and information into the FMS or flight management system of our C-130. Now, you'll probably hear different pilots and probably YouTubers and things call this box a whole host of different names. And that's because this box here seems to have a different name depending on your aircraft type, and I'm not quite sure why they all have different names. They all do the same thing. We'll call it CNI or the box here for our C-130 tutorial. After that, we have our AFCS control panel here, which is how we actually interact with the autopilot system itself. And we can see here that with an air start in the C-130, the pilot autopilot channel is engaged and the co-pilot autopilot channel is disengaged by default. Now, we also have the auto throttle on by default with an air start as well. And that's why we can see the throttles kind of rocking back and forth a little bit as the autopilot, or the auto throttle I should say, makes those little micro adjustments. Okay, so when it comes to actually navigating and using the autopilot and flight director, we have two separate modes of the flight director and thus the autopilot. We have roll modes and we have pitch modes. Roll modes are for lateral navigation, left and right. Pitch modes are for navigating up and down, changing your altitude. So let's first start off with the various roll modes, because those are a bit easier to understand. So all we need to do is come up to the ref mode panel here, and to put the aircraft into heading mode, we just simply select heading here, see that it is turned on. We'll get a little bit of a nuisance CNI message there letting us know that we are no longer in nav mode. And then wherever we place the heading bug on our HSI or duplicated up here on our HUD is where our aircraft is going to fly. So if we heard ATC come over the radio and say, hey, Spud 53 flight for traffic, come left heading 260. Well, all we need to do is pop the aircraft into heading mode and then move our heading bug over to a heading of 260. We can see that mirrored up here on the HUD as well as down here on our HSI on our PFD as well. Now, we might have ATC come back and say, sorry about that, Spud 53, for some more traffic, let's have you come right to a heading of 280 degrees. And no problem, we'll just move our heading bug right on over to 280 degrees. And the aircraft is simply just going to fly around and track our heading bug here. And boom, there she goes. And in case it wasn't clear, guys, on our AFCS panel, we're just moving this knob here, but we're doing it via the keybinds that we showed you guys earlier in the video here. Now, next, let's talk about the more complicated roll mode of our flight director and thus our autopilot. And that's going to be NAV mode. And that's where we start to dig into the CNI box right here on the center pedestal. So let's say that ATC comes up and he says, hey, Spud 53, you're cleared direct to the Han Airport. And I will go ahead and say, read that back, say, roger that, Spud 53 is cleared direct to the Han Airport. At which point, I'm going to come down to my CNI box here. I can check my legs page and see if Han is in my flight plan. There it is right there. Cool, no problem. And so I want to fly direct to Han, so I'm going to hit my direct button on the CNI. I'm then going to grab that waypoint, which is then going to populate it in the scratch pad here. Or conversely, I could type it in if I wanted to, but it's always easier to just grab it here to pop it into the scratch pad. And then we'll pop Han in our scratch pad up to the open data field boxes on the bottom left selection key. We're now set up to fly direct to Han, and we can see this in blue on our digital map. However, we have to tell the box, yes, this is what we want to do, and we have to execute that change. We want to make sure that we're talking with our co-pilot here, who seems to be taking a nap, and ensure that he is good with the change. Then we'll go ahead and hit execute. At which point, we'll go ahead and pause it here, at which point the FMS system, now that we've said we want to fly direct to the Han Airport, has basically drawn a line in RNAV direct from our PPOS or present position to that Han Airport waypoint that we set up in the mission editor here. Keep in mind that this works for all waypoints you set up in the mission editor or any waypoints that are in the C-130J's navigation database, which can be set up through the map through the map maker, the mission through the mission maker, and a whole host of other options, and will probably be provided by the mission maker in your knee board. Now, also another thing to keep in mind here is that we can use nav mode to fly direct to a VOR or a TACAN without using radio navigation. If we were to say pop in a TACAN identifier into the FMS here, we could actually navigate to that VOR TACAN using RNAV through our FMS system. So with that, we have everything set up and we're flying direct to Han. But we need to tell the flight director that's what we want to do. So coming back up to the ref mode panel here, all we need to do is hit the nav mode, and we're now flying over to our Han waypoint at this point. Now we can see here that the aircraft is doing a bit of a snake pattern getting back to that waypoint and that flight path. And that's because the FMS system here drew that direct straight line for our RNAV navigation from that current present position when we pressed the execute button down here. So if you have a little bit of a delay between actually setting it up in the box and then hitting the nav button, one thing you can always do is just to clean that up is to do another direct to HON once again, and boom, execute that again, and that will clean things up and make a more current line to the HON waypoint. We were kind of already back to that RNAV navigation line right to our waypoint there, so it didn't do much for us at that point, but it is always a good little trick to make your flight path a little smoother. Now, next, let's say that ATC comes up on the radio here and they tell us, hey, Spud53, sorry about this, we've got a weird routing for you. We need you to fly direct to the Ramstein TACAN station. And I'm saying, okay, Spud53 is flying direct to the Ramstein TACAN station. Well, we need to find the Ramstein TACAN station identifier. Easiest way to do that is go to the F10 map here, zoom in on Ramstein Airport, we can see the TACAN, and we can see its identifier is Romeo Mike Sierra. So at this point, we don't need to create a Romeo Mike Sierra actual point within our flight plan. All we need to do is just hit the direct to button, type into the scratch pad RMS, pop it into the open field. It creates a new RMS waypoint at the top of our flight plan. We hit execute, and boom, we're now flying on over to the Ramstein TACAN station. And we can see that's quite a big turn there, but that's no problem. So now that we've gone over both of the roll modes in pretty big depth here, we've got the heading mode as well as the nav mode covered, let's talk about how we would change altitudes when flying our C-130. Now, there seems to be a little bit of some bugs and maybe some work that needs to be done with the VNAV modes or vertical navigation modes of the FMS of our C-130, but we'll try to explain everything as quickly and easily as possible here. So essentially, for our vertical navigation modes, for climbs and descents, we have 4 buttons here. We have the altitude hold button, which comes on when our FMS has captured our selected altitude. And in this case, our selected altitude is 5,000 feet. So our aircraft is doing its best to hold 5,000 feet. We can see here we're about 20 feet off, but that's well within the usual margin of error. So don't worry about that too much. We don't want to get wrapped around that axle. Then we have altitude select. Altitude select allows us to select a new altitude in the altitude window here on the HUD or down on the PFD, and that will essentially arm altitude hold to hold the new altitude we've selected once we've descended to it or climbed to it. Essentially, it's a way of telling the aircraft, hey, I'm going to climb to or descend to a new altitude, and then I want you to hold it once we get there. And it's very important because if altitude select is not on and you don't see an on light here and you climb to your new selected altitude, you're going to climb right through it or descend right through it because it's the altitude select button that arms the altitude hold mode. Now down below it we have a VS button, and this is the vertical speed mode, and then we have the IAS for indicated airspeed mode. IAS indicated airspeed mode doesn't seem to be working as of this current build of the C-130, but vertical speed mode definitely is. And I find vertical speed mode to be a little easier to work with anyway. Basically what it does for you is as you're climbing or descending, it's going to hold your current vertical speed for the entire climb or the entire descent from when you actually turn this mode on. Conversely, you also don't have to have vertical speed or IAS mode on at all as you're climbing or descending. You can just go off of pitch on your HUD or your PFD. So let's try a couple of climbs and descents here to kind of give an example to all that talking we just did. So ATC comes up on the radio and says, oh man, Spud 5-3, this is gonna been a rough day for you guys, but we got some more traffic. We need you to descend now to 4,000 feet. Cool, all we gotta do is select 4,000 feet. We can see that here at the top right of our altitude tape on our PFD, as well as up here on our HUD. Once we see we have 4,000 feet selected, we have altitude select mode on. We can then use that AFCS pitch up and down button to pitch the aircraft down. I'm looking at my vertical speed here. Usually for these very quick descents, only about 1,000 feet, things for traffic and whatnot in the terminal area, I usually like to go for a vertical speed of about 1,500 feet per minute. Anything more than that's a bit excessive. Anything less than that, air traffic control can get a little bit cranky because they don't see you descending quick enough, especially if it's for traffic. And then as we get closer to 4,000 feet, we're going to see the autopilot has captured that altitude, and we can see that altitude hold mode has come back on, and the autopilot is leveling us at 4,000 feet. Again, guys, please keep in mind here that the autopilot is simply following the flight director guidance. You can do all of this and follow the flight director by hand flying super easily, and this is the standard way of flying a large aircraft like that. We have our co-pilot setting up and doing all of the flight director changes, and then as we're hand flying, we're just following that flight director around. Okay, so let's try a climb at this point. So let's say ATC comes back and says, hey, Spud 5-3, let's have you climb back up to 5,000 feet. Okay, no problem. We'll reselect 5,000 feet on the ref mode panel here, and we'll go ahead and use that AFCS pitch up button. We'll pitch the aircraft up. Gonna go for about 1,000 foot per minute climb. And then let's say if we like this 1,000 foot per minute climb here, we can go ahead and turn on vertical speed mode, and the aircraft is going to try its best to hold onto that vertical speed throughout the entire climb here. Something to keep in mind, guys, is in vertical speed, if say you're super heavy and maybe you're up at altitude as you're making these climbs and descents, you may run into an issue where you may inadvertently stall the airplane. There are no stall protections for vertical speed mode. However, in IAS there are stall protection. However, I have not been able to get IAS mode to work correctly as of yet, so hopefully that will change for you guys soon. Okay. So now let's try and go ahead and combine some of these different modes that we have here. So let's do a combined change in altitude and our roll mode. So let's go ahead and have ATC tell us, hey, Spud 1-1, good news, we can get you back on course here. Let's have you turn right to a heading of 280 and descend and maintain 3,500. No problem. First thing I like to do is probably bring my heading bug around to 280 degrees. We can see that on our heading bug on our HSI here, as well as up here on our HUD as well. We'll go ahead and hit heading mode. The aircraft will start to come on back to the right-hand side. And then once we're starting to head into the right direction, we'll then start our descent to 3,500. Altitude select down to 3,500. Can see that both on the PFD and the HUD, of course. And we'll go ahead and initiate that descent using the AFCS pitch down button. I'm going to go for a descent rate of about 1,500 foot per minute. And then so I don't have to worry about adjusting my descent rate here, I'm just going to go ahead and turn on the vertical speed mode. And then as we're in this descent, and in this turn, ATC comes back and says, Spud 5-3, good news here. We have got you direct to your destination at this point. Please continue that right-hand turn on around towards Spangdahlem Airfield. You're cleared direct to Spangdahlem. At which point, I've got a bit of an option here. What we typically do when flying large aircraft is we want to just keep the heading bug coming back around towards Spangdahlem Airfield over here, so that way we can keep that turn coming and make things as smooth as possible. And then as we're still in that turn, then we can go down into the box here, the CNI, and do a direct to Spangdahlem Airfield. And that usually makes things a lot easier and smoother, so that way there's a lot less banking and rolling of the aircraft all the time, which could knock passengers loose, knock cargo loose, things of that nature. So we'll just keep our heading bug coming on around towards Spangdahlem. Not sure what my PFD went away there. I probably hit a keybind that I'm not quite used to yet. And then coming down into the box, we'll just do a direct to Spang, boop, right there. We'll execute it and back to NAV mode. And now we're heading to our destination of Spangdahlem Airfield. So guys, this was a super quick and cursory look at the various modes of the flight director and thus the autopilot system here in the new C-130J Hercules. I hope that this was helpful for you guys and helps you guys kind of get used to how we do things in a large aircraft like the C-130. And if it helped you guys out, please leave a like and a subscribe. I hope you guys all have a wonderful holiday season with friends and family out there. Make sure, of course, you enjoy this beautiful game, the new Hercules, and we'll see you in the next one. Fly safe out there, guys.